Yesterday, as the worst of the pandemic raged, childhood hunger skyrocketed. Even now, 1 in 6 kids may be living with hunger. Today, we start rebuilding, and tomorrow, we'll give them everything they need to grow up happy and strong. For their tomorrow, we're reimagining a world where every kid has the food they need to thrive. Visit nokidhungry.org/rebuild to find out what you can do for kids in your community.
As a community, we build empathy, curiosity, joy, and connection when we share stories with you. Welcome to Storytellers Project, part of the USA Today network.
Hi, I'm Scott Fisher of the York Daily Record, where I work as Central Pennsylvania Regional News Director. We so appreciate you sharing your evening with us tonight. We are joined by Humana, No Kid Hungry, and 5 Americans from across the region to create community. Since 2016, the Storytellers Project has brought more than 100 shows each year to communities across the country. We've canceled our in-person season in response to the ongoing pandemic, so we've handpicked incredible storytellers and inspiring people to bring you a show about the meaning of home that will be charming, funny, relatable, and touching. Let's say hi to our storytellers. Delma Rivera Lytle of Seven Valleys, Pennsylvania. Kaja Manuel of Trenton, New Jersey. Kim Bixler of New York City. Andrew Shelfo of East Hampton, Massachusetts. And Natalie Scott of Newark, Delaware. And we will have a Q&A with Pamela Taylor, Chief Communications and Marketing Officer for No Kid Hungry, so we can learn a little more about how we can all help. Tonight's show benefits No Kid Hungry, and you can donate right now by going to nokidhungry.org/USA Today. Here's why. 1 in 6 kids in America today could face hunger because of the coronavirus. In the wake of the pandemic, millions of children are still living with hunger. Rebuilding starts with feeding every child in every community. With generous support from Humana, No Kid Hungry is helping schools and communities get the food, support, and equipment they need to feed children. Humana is proud to support No Kid Hungry to connect kids to healthy meals. And they're making your donation go even further by matching all donations through this page up to $25,000. Child hunger is a very real problem in America, but there are real workable solutions, and No Kid Hungry and their partners are experts at making them work. This crisis has shown that unemployment and hunger can touch any family, anywhere, anytime. It's on all of us to ensure kids get the food they need, regardless of circumstance. No Kid Hungry is singularly focused on not just fighting childhood hunger, but ending it for good. Through emergency grants, hands-on guidance, and rallying the right people, they're helping put meals on the table for hungry children. Again, you can be part of the solution at nokidhungry.org/USA Today. So tonight is not a TED Talk. It's not Toastmasters. It is not a how-to talk or an inspirational speech or an educational lecture or a slideshow. We will not sell you anything except maybe a subscription. And well, of course, we're asking for donations to No Kid Hungry. But this is storytelling, and storytelling is based on visiting. You open your heart and your mind, and you pay attention to a person you care about and want to feel closer to. So we invite you to do that tonight. Now, some of these storytellers will be polished and professional. Some will be casual and conversational. And we ask you to receive all of them because that's how community change happens. Now, one particular story tonight deals with the loss of a child. We know this can be a hard topic for many people, so we wanted to let you know before the show. And for anyone who is experiencing grief, there is help. Visit the Compassionate Friends website at compassionatefriends.org to find a chapter near you. We believe creating empathy and understanding is vital, and especially in times of uncertainty. And I am so honored to welcome up our first teller. Delma Rivera Lytle will share how her family came from Puerto Rico and found a welcoming home in York, Pennsylvania.
When my parents made the decision in 1961 to move to York, Pennsylvania, that was a decision that completely changed my life. I was 3 years old at the time, and my father became the first Latino physician in York, Pennsylvania, and I became one of the first Spanish-speaking students in my elementary school. So that gave me a lot of challenges and also provided a lot of opportunities for me. I loved our home. My dad's office was on the first floor, and we lived on the 2 floors above that. And I became my dad's little sidekick. I'd always come down the steps, and I got an opportunity to practice my English with many of the patients that I would examine them as my dad was treating them. And often they would ask specifically for me if I wasn't there, and my dad would call up to my mom on the 2nd or 3rd floor for me to come down. And it just gave me an opportunity to become very proud of the work that my dad was doing and getting to know the community. And I was his sidekick, and I would even do house calls and sometimes visit the hospital with him as well, and just became very proud of the work that he was doing. So then as I entered school, I entered Madison Elementary School in 1st grade, and I had a teacher that was just exceptionally kind to me. Her name was Natalie Butler. And she initially was very upset because the principal had pulled me from the regular class and put me in with students that had learning and behavioral issues. And she saw that I was a student that was putting in a lot of effort and that I was a good student. She took me under her wing, and she spent extra time with my pronunciation and with my spelling, and just made me feel very special. And I ended up winning many spelling bees thanks to her efforts in helping me and taking me aside and just making me feel like a special student. And she still is alive today. She's in her 90s, and she belongs to my church. And when I see her, I just think of what a welcoming community York was. And she's also had a chance to meet my daughter, Maria. Well, as my parents really started to create a meaningful life here in York, they saw that there was a need for many services for the Latino community in areas such as education, transportation, employment, and even in translation services. Once the patients had seen my dad and would go to York Hospital, or they would go to nursing homes. And so they met with people within the Latino community and founded the Spanish American Center in York. And this was really a work of love. And this was not something that we just saw my parents doing. This became heart and soul of our family. And as a teenager, I spent many late nights painting and cleaning. And my brother even ended up doing his Eagle Scout project in the community room of the Spanish American Center. So this was something that really became so critical in our lives, and just working in the community. And I found out later in life that my father even put up his office as collateral so that there would be the money to purchase the building for the Spanish Center. And it was always extremely important for my parents to continue to celebrate our culture. We would always celebrate Three Kings Day, and we had Puerto Rican food. And I would take food that my mom would make, paella and pastelillos and flan to school. And I would take my dog that understood both Spanish and English so that I could share my culture. And it was the first time many people had had exposure to anything ethnic. And to this day, many of my classmates will bring this up when I see them at class reunions. And one of the big things to celebrate in our culture was quinceañera, which is a sweet 15, which is something that is not celebrated here. We celebrate the sweet 16. And so my parents compromised, and I had a big pool party for my sweet 16, but it showed how they also, acclimated to a place that didn't celebrate in the same way, but it still was something that I was, that I was able to do. And that I didn't feel that I was a misfit or that I felt out of place. And then my mom would also share that at the time that they first moved here, when my parents first moved here, that my mom wasn't sure how she would fit in. And of all groups, there was a group called the Medical Auxiliary that was a social group for the doctors' wives. And my mom saw this as a very elite, all the socialite women of York, and that this would be a group that would not accept her. And as it turns out, this was an organization that became my mom's closest friends. And my parents would go on to say that they were originally here in York. It was on a 2-year plan that they really wanted to return, to their culture, to their family, but that York had been so welcoming. And this one group really made my mom feel welcome. And it just showed how one person, one organization can make such a difference. And my mom, being embraced by the community in the way that she was, became very involved with social justice work. And she was involved in many boards. And I would always see this as an example of, wow, she didn't know anybody here. And she was welcomed by the community. And she also gave back to the community as well. And she was on many boards. And she won a very prestigious award, the Dory Leader Award, one of the former governor's wives, who was really involved in so much racial justice work. And as it turns out, many years later, I was also given the same award. And I just felt very proud that I was continuing the work that my mom had done in York, because York has also been a welcoming community to me. And I feel I'm somewhat following in her footsteps as a diversity officer in the school district that I graduated from. And one of the biggest honors in 2019, during Hispanic Heritage Month, my parents were honored with a street naming in their memory, the 200 block of East Princess Street in the city. And it was such a glorious day to look out and see such a diverse group of people from the York community, my dad's former patients, his colleagues, people from the community, the York City Council making a proclamation, the Governor's Commission on Latino Affairs, still recognizing my parents and remembering them. And there was one moment when my brother and I were unveiling the street sign in their memory. And as I was looking up into the sky, someone took a photo and said, it was as though you were looking up at your parents and they were looking down at you. Because you were continuing their work. And I thought of there's a book that was written by a local author that's called Never to Be Forgotten. And I really thought in that moment, my parents will never be forgotten in York. It was a community that welcomed them and that they embraced this community. And I'm still living here after moving here when I was 3 years old. And so as I remember my parents, I like to even quote the way that people remember them in the community, and many of the thoughts that were shared with us that day of the street dedication, that they were humble, giving people that always put the welfare of others before them, and that to be remembered with love. And that I will always continue to share in the giving and the legacy that my parents have given to York, and that I will always stay in this community, and that I will always share the love and the legacy of my parents that they received when they first came here in 1961.
Thank you, Delma, for sharing the story of your pioneering parents with us. In making York their home, they helped create a welcoming home for an increasingly diverse community. So Humana is sponsoring the Storytellers Project shows nationally and now virtually because they believe that sharing stories makes for healthier people and healthier communities. And we need these connections to each other and to health now more than ever. With the COVID-19 vaccines available where you live, consider talking to your healthcare professional about what's right for you. Visit humana.com for more about what they're doing to connect you to better to your health and your community. Again, Humana is proud to support No Kid Hungry in helping to connect kids to healthy meals. And they're making your donation go even further by matching all donations through this page up to $25,000. So next up, we have Kaja Manuel. He became homeless when he was 18 years old, and his story explains how he traveled around the world to find home right where he thought he lost it.
Picture it. It's August 2008. I'm living in an all-males dormitory at Shaw University. Shaw University is the first historically Black college university in the South. And I ended up at Shaw because my parents felt as if I needed to dive into my Black culture and to learn more about the civil rights movement. I'm not sure if I ever lived up to my parents' dreams and found out, what they'd hope I'd find out about my ancestors. But I ended up learning a lot about myself. I realized I was gay. And growing up where I'm from, you can be a drug dealer, you can sell bean pies on a corner, you can be anything except gay. And there's a line from Wanda Sykes' skit, Wanda Sykes, the comedian, and she describes coming out to her mother, and her mother's like, Lord, just give her cancer, just don't let her be gay. And that's how it is growing up where I'm from in Trenton. And before I knew it, I was completely cut off, and life as I had known it had changed entirely. I tried to make home at Shaw the best I could, but it was almost as if the universe just wasn't ready for me to have college yet. As a result of my family cutting me off, I was forced to couch surf and learn the local bus route. I ended up working at the local mall, the Crabtree Mall, and I ended up having completely on-call shifts as an Abercrombie and Fitch storefront model. At the time, it was a job, so I thought I was, hot stuff. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this work. At this time, communication with my family had completely cut off, and I had this sort of reassurance within about it, and it was like I just knew everything would be okay, or at least I thought I knew everything would be okay. Unfortunately, I couldn't keep up with the tuition, and after staying with my friend Tanya on her couch for a few months, my Uncle Philip ended up purchasing me a flight ticket home. And, I was a little reluctant to go back home. And once I flew from North Carolina back to New Jersey, nothing felt like home. I went from couch surfing in Raleigh, North Carolina, to couch surfing back in Jersey. I had stayed with an aunt here, a friend here. I also stayed with my grandmother on and off. But it was when I returned back home after coming out that I met Dean and Isis. And Dean and Isis are, they were fabulous, flamboyant, eccentric, just like pow, glitz, glam, and glitter. And it was Dean and Isis that really taught me how to navigate life in Trenton as an LGBTQ person of color. I ended up starting college over. I ended up attending Mercer County Community College. And I ended up doing okay, just a C student, just making it through, still couch surfing. And at this time, my connection to Dean and Isis had dwindled. I felt very alone and stagnant in this moment. I ended up joining the media club there. And there's a program at Mercer that partners with the local county news and the university. And that's when I started to really meet my people, my crowd, and people to associate with. I had my brother Javon, who was always there. We were like two peas in the pod. And we became really close with a guy named Cornelius. And Cornelius ended up being our camera guy for the local news channel. Cornelius also loved sports. And one day, after coming home from university, Cornelius was gunned down in front of his aunt's house. And it was in that moment that I knew I had to get out of town. So on just like any other college campus, you have your military recruiters. And right after we got the news about Cornelius, I went to campus and I chased down my recruiters. It was like I was recruiting them. I was like, I have to get out of here. And I remember thinking to myself, if I'm going to die, it's going to be for a reason. Like, I just can't die here. And I remember seeing an image of a newspaper pop in my head, struggling student, gunned down, number 15. That ended up being one of the worst most violent years in Trenton's history. And that's how I found my way joining the United States Army. So, as I just said, my mind was made up. I had to go. It was going to take the Lord himself to keep me from leaving Trenton. Like he would have had to literally come down from the heavens and be like, son, no. And during this time period, I ended up losing my grandmother, whom of which I actually lived with on and off. My biological father had passed away. One of my childhood friends, Rodney, had also passed away. And as the relationship with my mother began to mend as a result of those deaths, it was almost as if as soon as we got close together, we were getting close, our relationship was mending, I was leaving, going straight to the Army. And it wasn't until I actually shipped off that my mother thought that I was actually going to leave. My mom and her brothers are probably thinking like, this little scrawny gay kid from Trenton is not going to the Army. I mean, at the time I weighed probably 120 pounds soaking wet. But I knew I had to leave. My mind was made up. I got out of town. And that was a huge transition for me. I had met two of my best friends, Arnell Bing and Chris Donnelly, and we ended up being each other's support systems when times got rough. And I really needed friends like that to get me through. After basic training, I was transferred to Korea. And that was the first time I really had to make a home for myself. I had went from Korea completely alone and was forced to make it home. And that's what soldiers do. They beat that into you. They adapt. And you know how in the normal civilian world, people have their work moms, their work brothers, their work wives. Well, the Army's like that, but times 1,000. We eat together, we work together, we live together, we work out together. And in some instances, depending on your unit, you shower together. So you're always together. In some ways, I like to compare it to a college campus, but for adults. A few duty stations later, I'm in Italy, and you know, it's the same thing. Find my battle rhythm, as they call it, and find my groove. Find out who my people are, who are those people that love me and affirm me and make me feel good. And you know, the Army took me all over the world, and I learned how to make each place a home. And you know, now here I am. I'm ready for what life has next. After living in Italy for 3 years, I decided to transition out of the Army. And when you transition out of the Army, we have a transition program where you choose your cohort. I chose the Career Cohort. As a part of that, you take a personality test to see which job suits you best. And it comes with a list. And politician was among those on the list. And being in the sort of unit that I was in, we saw congressmen and legislators. They would frequent, you know, travel to Italy to tour the facilities and see how we're living. And that kind of stayed in the back of my mind. But once I got the list and I saw a politician, I was eager. I knew I was going to go home. I said, I'm going to run for mayor. I'm going to serve my community in a different capacity. And one thing led to another. And when I returned home, it was like, dum, dum, dum. I came right back where it all began. I was back on my mama's couch. And at the time, I realized I was taking the necessary baby steps back into the real world to have that adjustment to civilian life. And there were setbacks initially, but I kept my why in my mind and harped on it when times got rough to keep me centered. Like, you're going to go home. I had a plan. I wrote everything down in my notebook, you know, get a job here, let this job set you up for the job you want. And everything started to work out. And after service, I returned back home where it all began. You know, I'm a new, but yet same Kaja, have the same love for my community, and I'm in a different position now. I now have the ability to serve my community and share my experiences and wisdom with them and show them that they matter. And if I can overcome homelessness and all the other obstacles, so can they. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaja. We so appreciate you opening up to us with your story about coming home and finding acceptance. I know so many people can relate to your story.
During this crisis, millions of Americans are struggling to afford food for their children. No Kid Hungry is here to help. We're working with organizations nationwide to feed children during and beyond this crisis. If you need help, simply visit nokidhungry.org/help to find free meals for your kids. No questions asked, no registration needed. It's just healthy food for kids who need it. Go to nokidhungry.org/help today.
This show is benefiting No Kid Hungry, a national nonprofit dedicated to connecting children with food. We have plenty of food in the United States and nutrition programs that work. The problem is not enough children have access to them. So No Kid Hungry gives schools and community groups the funds and guidance needed to launch and grow programs that feed more kids. That includes school breakfasts, summer meals served at schools and community centers, after-school meals, and emergency feeding programs during times of crisis. They do research and they advocate for solutions that work. When you donate to No Kid Hungry, you can help break down whatever barriers stand between a hungry child and a healthy meal. Consider donating now at nokidhungry.org/USA today. Our next storyteller is Kim Bixler, who has a story about growing up in a house designed by a very famous architect.
So when I was 8 years old, we moved into my parents' dream home. Now, that's if your dream entails a leaky roof, having strangers knock on your door all the time, begging for a peek inside, having people look inside of your windows, and be constantly hounded to make your bed and cleaning your room. So as a kid, I desperately wanted a house with a pool. But instead of new swimming pool, I got Frank Lloyd Wright. One of the most famous American architects designed one house in Rochester, New York, and my parents bought it. In the spring of 1977, we pulled down East Boulevard in our yellow Pinto, this double-wide, impressive street with all these amazing houses, and then up to our house, which looked nothing like any of the other houses. This house was full of windows with little bars all over them and little colored pieces of glass. The roof was like these two ancient peasant hats. The front door was off to the side, and when you walked in, you were faced like you went right into a wall, and it was short and dark and really, really tight. So my little brother Kurt and I were escorted to our fish pond in the house, which was this circular lava rock little pond that was built into the veranda floor. This is definitely not the pool that I was hoping for, but we placed our goldfish in the pond. My mom had us put them in, she had put them in little air-filled baggies. So while they bobbed along and acclimated to the water, Kurt and I explored the house. The first thing we found was this old phone and an intercom, and it had the name Boynton on the first label. My mom said, that belongs to Edward Boynton, who hired Frank Lloyd Wright in 1906, more than 70 years ago, to design this house. See how it's amazing. It looks so modern. Well, I thought it looked a little creepy. Of course, we were standing in the basement by this time, which smelled like wet towels. And my parents, because they wanted us to see the pool table that the previous owners had left for us. Another wrong kind of pool. But Kurt and I ran upstairs and we stepped into our dining room and stopped. The room was enormous. And it had these two huge wooden tables that matched each other. My mom told us that they were designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. And on the corners of one of the tables, all four corners, were these little glass boxes that had these colored glass and these little pieces of black that matched the windows. So it wasn't bars that were on the windows, but it was pieces of metal that were interspersed with colored and clear glass. The Frank Lloyd Wright house was nothing like anything I had ever seen before. I soon learned that a lot of people wanted to see our house as well. People would peek in our windows, and Kurt and I would occasionally jump scare them from inside the house. And at least once a week, someone would be sitting on our sidewalk with an easel drawing a picture of our house. Now, Before we moved in, the previous owners had a full schedule of fee-based tours. And in the 2 years they lived there, over 2,000 people clogged this quiet street and toured our house, which annoyed, alienated, and generally pissed off the neighbors. So my mom decided to limit the tours to architecture students, professors, community groups, and charitable organizations, and make friends with all the neighbors. So first thing she did is she invited all the neighbors over for lunch and to welcome them. And she told them they could have a private tour of the house for their family or their friends anytime they liked. And she also introduced them to her new tour guide, 8-year-old me. I didn't volunteer to give tours. I was voluntold. But during my first tour, I stood on my fireplace with a stack of 3x5 note cards in my hand. These are the actual note cards that my mom typed up. And I began my tour. Oh, I live in a house designed by architect Frank Lloyd Wright, built in 1908 for widower Edward E. Boynton and his 19-year-old daughter Beulah. Edward Boynton was the partner in the Ham Lantern Company, and then I would hold up one of the lanterns. Soon I got very good with the tours. I explained to architecture students that this was a prairie-style house designed to fit, not fight the landscape. I was in 3rd grade, and these architecture students and historic preservationists were taking notes from what I said. Me, a kid. When I escorted them to the dining room, I watched their faces as they scanned the room. And I got my note cards out again. Repetition of pattern and shape create a rhythm in a building like a piece of music. But there was silence, stunned silence, as they experienced the same feeling Kurt and I had when we first walked into that dining room. Giving tours was fun. Well, after a few weeks of conducting tours, my mom suggested that I bring my house in for show and tell. So my house was the first show and tell field trip the elementary school had ever had. Everybody got a permission slip, and they even chartered a school bus to take everybody to my house. And I was the tour guide. I stood on the fireplace with my note cards, and I began my tour to my 4th grade classmates. I live in a house designed by architect Frank Lloyd Wright for widower Edward E. Boynton and his 19-year-old daughter Beulah. I explained to my classmates how Frank Lloyd Wright used a technique called compression and release. So when you first entered his homes in these little, small, dark spaces, they squeezed you in. So when you walked into the dining room, it looked even bigger and more expansive. I showed my fellow 4th graders my best hiding spots and the best technique for sliding down the staircase in a sleeping bag. And then I guided them to the fish pond to show them our 3 goldfish of varying sizes. And I said, everyone, meet Frank, Lloyd, and Wright. I heard a few, that's cool, and awesomes. And then puberty hit, and where I lived suddenly didn't seem cool or awesome. I was mortified when I heard people say, she lives in a mansion. She is rich. I didn't want to think about my house and certainly didn't brag about it. I went to East High School, a socioeconomically diverse school, and I was uncomfortable with the perception that my family was wealthy. The Frank Lloyd Wright house was a financial drain on my parents. But like running around with pots and pans when you're, a little kid was fun as a child, but as a teenager, it meant money. And we lived frugally, usually traveled just to visit my grandparents. But bottom line, I lived in an ostentatious house. And I was reminded of that daily, watching the people walk by, stop and stare. People set up their easels. I felt judged and scrutinized. And this precocious 8-year-old became a really self-conscious 14-year-old. I forgot those moments, the reactions, the look on a person's face when they stepped into that dining room for the first time. I refused to give any tours. But the summer before college, I worked as a lifeguard. Yeah, I have a thing for pools. And I was sitting there, and this huge crowd of students came and descended upon the pool. So I struck up a conversation and said, "What are you guys doing here?" And they said, "Oh, we're architecture students from Cornell." I said, "Well, oh my gosh, I just got into Cornell. I'm going there this fall." And then it occurred to me, "Are you here visiting the Frank Lloyd Wright house?" Yeah, we just came from there." Did the homeowner know you were coming?" She seemed a little surprised. My lifeguarding shift could not end fast enough. I ran home, confronted my mom, and she said, "I know, I totally forgot. I forgot there was a tour today." I ran upstairs into my bathroom, and there, lying all over my bathroom, shirt, bra, underwear. Everyone now has seen my dirty underwear at Cornell. I was ready to leave my Frank Lloyd Wright house behind me. But during my sophomore year in college, I was taking this class, History 275, Crime and Punishment. I was getting punished. So I decided to walk up to the professor after class one day because he had been talking about Frank Lloyd Wright in his lecture. So I figured, just in case it might help my grade, maybe I'll talk to him. So I said, "Professor Sompkin, I live in a Frank Lloyd Wright house." His face immediately lit up. He's like, "My wife, she was an apprentice for Frank Lloyd Wright. She designed our house here in Ithaca. Do you have any pictures of your house? Do you think you could come over on Friday night?" I was like, "Oh, okay." So that Friday, I went over to his house. He greeted me at the front door and led me into his living room. And there were 10 people sitting there. He's like, "Everyone, this is Kim. I invited her over to speak about her house." I was the guest lecturer and I didn't even know it. But I went, stood on their fireplace. I laid out the pictures of my house. And I began the tour I had been given since I was 8 years old. This time I didn't need note cards. I live in a house designed by architect Frank Lloyd Wright, built in 1908 for widower Edward E. Boynton and his 19-year-old daughter Beulah. I watched their faces, saw them study the photos, and I thought, swimming pool, Frank Lloyd Wright. Swimming pool, definitely Frank Lloyd Wright. And that evening, it set me on the path of my life's work. Nope, not an architect, but eventually I wrote a book, compiled all my family stories. I do speaking engagements now, and I'm even writing a musical. And because of that Frank Lloyd Wright house, and because of those tours I gave as a child, and because of that show and tell field trip, 2 of my classmates on that field trip are now architects. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, for bringing your home so vividly to life for us. I remember visiting Falling Water here in Pennsylvania as a child and wishing I could live there rather than in the cookie cutter suburban rancher where we live. But I guess it's funny how the passage of time changes your perspective about your home, hopefully in a good way.
I just went to Falling Water, so it's amazing. Thank you.
So now we will hear from a person on the front line of this work, Pamela Taylor, Chief Communications and Marketing Officer for No Kid Hungry, so we can learn a little more about how all of us can help. Here, she's in a conversation with Storytellers Project founder, Megan Finnerty.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Aren't these stories like, it's a lot, right? We so appreciate all of the work that you and your organization does. So let's get into it. You know, in the decade before the pandemic, No Kid Hungry and its partner organizations had really made huge strides in cutting childhood hunger. But now some of those gains have been lost. Can you talk to us about that 1 in 6 number, kind of what the situation looks like this school year?
Yeah, so, in 2018, we saw some of the lowest rates of childhood hunger that we had seen in a decade. The numbers were about 1 in 7 children, almost 1 in 8 children were facing hunger. during the pandemic, right around March of last year, when everything started to shut down, school doors were closing and schools were trying to do just what Peggy described, we saw that number go as close to 1 in 4. And we've seen some improvements because of a lot of things that have happened. So the number is this year around 1 in 6 children may be living with hunger. It's not where we want it to be, but we're definitely starting to trend back in the right direction.
That's great. That's really what we're here is, right? Like we said before, that there is a solution to these things. I wanted to talk about, you guys really worked hard last year to adjust some of the policies at the federal and state and local levels. Can you talk a little bit more about that flexibility in distributing food and some of the things that you found worked and what you're trying to make durable?
Exactly. So just like everyone else, we had to figure things out quickly. And one of the things that we learned right away is there are parameters and restrictions in place on where kids can consume food. When food is given out for school breakfast or lunch or after school meals, that needs to be done on school property. Well, what happens when schools are closed? What are children supposed to do? So we had to, as an organization, work with our advocacy groups, our own government relations teams, and make sure the federal government was willing to make some adjustments so that schools and parents and teachers could get food to kids that weren't at school. So we saw opportunities where parents could come by and pick up meals for their kids without having to have their kids in their car. Initially, when this first started, the kids had to be present. That wasn't the safest and healthiest thing to do. So the federal government recognized that that was probably not the best option, lifted some waivers by the USDA so that parents could come and pick up meals for their kids and take them back home. A lot of what Peggy just described, where they used their school buses and they went into neighborhoods and were able to drop off meals for children. Everybody had to get super creative and figure out what policies do we need to look at differently so that we can meet the need of the people where they are during the time that we're in. A lot of those policy changes, though, have been implemented even beyond where we were this time last year. We've seen things like SNAP benefit increases for families, so that there is additional money for meals and to get groceries and other things that their families need to have nutritious meals every day. We're seeing things that we just didn't know. How long were people going to be out of work? How long were we going to be able to provide the meals that everyone needed? So these additional SNAP benefits turned out to be really, really beneficial to families.
Thank you for going into that kind of detail, because I think it's hard for people in the abstract, like government policies and bureaucracies, right? It's kind of hard to picture. So just the specificity around No Kid Hungry and some of its partners saying back to the federal government, hey, if you have 3 kids in a house and they all have different class schedules and they're all different ages, it might be physically impossible for the mom to find, or the dad to find, an hour when they're not all in class or they all have a break and they can all pile into the car, get the food, prove they exist.
That's right.
It's a nightmare. Yeah.
That's
and so
right.
I really hear that, things, anyway, it's complicated, but another thing that came up for a lot of us last year, in addition to being, I think, really aware of bureaucracies, is how not everybody, depending on where you volunteered or where you lived, might have imagined how widespread hunger is. And after seeing so many nights on the light of news coverage of lines at food banks all across the country, do you feel like the pandemic exposed a hunger crisis? Did it create a hunger crisis? Was it already there? Help us understand, kind of from your position, what that looks like.
It did both, right? Okay. Hunger oftentimes is referred to as a hidden crisis. You can't see hunger on people all the time. And so what the pandemic did is it brought hunger to everybody's television, everybody's mindset, because you couldn't help, like you said, but ignore the hours-long lines at food banks. What it also did is it made hunger much more visible. In other words, people started to see their neighbors in line and their kids' classmates in line and their, friends and families from church in line. People who didn't experience hunger before were certainly facing it in a way that they had never done before. And I think it was important that we tried to make sure people did not feel any kind of shame or stigma around having this moment that no one planned for. No one planned to lose their jobs. No one planned for schools to be closed. No one planned for everything to shut down. And we've heard many times people say, many of us are, one paycheck away from a disaster. And this is what was revealed. This was what the crisis revealed. In addition to all the things that the crisis was, it revealed another crisis. And so I think people had a different understanding and appreciation for the crisis of hunger. And this was something that it made everyone kind of step back and say, wow, I didn't know that it was so pervasive. I didn't know that it was so close to me. I didn't know it could come into my own kitchen. And that was something that I think everyone kind of really got a very up close and personal view with last year.
I mean, that feels very true. I know I'd have Zoom calls with my family, and it was a conversation I had with my siblings. We all live in different cities all throughout the West, and each of us talked about, where were we funneling our donations and how many people it seemed like needed our help, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic. We have time for one more question, and I want to go back to that 1 in 6 number. We know it's down from at the peak of the pandemic, so we have a lot to be confident that your donations can make a difference. But talk to us for a second about, a lot of people are aware that they need to donate. How does our donation today, like, where does that money go? How much money have you already donated? Like, kind of give us a sense of scope.
Sure. So the first thing I want to say is the generosity and just sheer humanity of America showed up last year when people saw, neighbors and television screens full of food bank lines. Donations poured into No Kid Hungry, and we are so eternally grateful for everyone that showed up for us. Our corporate partners showed up for us. Partners that we had never worked with before wanted to know, what can we do to help? And things that people didn't even think about because, like I said, no one had faced this before. How do we do this? What do we need? How do we transport a cafeteria full of food to neighborhoods all over our school district? So the money went towards refrigerators and portable coolers and portable heaters, and some areas where people couldn't get to school to get the food, they needed transportation. And so school districts bought vans and shuttles so that they could load them up with bags of food so that they could go into neighborhoods just like Peggy described. There were so many things. We needed PPE, of course. We needed to make sure everyone that was going out to distribute food or hand out food, they were safe and healthy. We had inclement weather, all over the country. Depending on where you live, it could have been really hot or super cold. And we wanted to provide funding so that they could protect themselves from the elements. This was going on every single day for about 16 to 18 months. And here we are. What we are so grateful for is since March of 2020, the numbers just came out yesterday, No Kid Hungry has been able to donate $98 million in grants to schools and school districts and community-based organizations all across the country, to about 2,300 different schools and school districts. That is because people have been so very generous to us. And just like you said, if you could today or sometime in the near future, go to nokidhungry.org/USA Today, we would be so, so grateful. We've not seen a decline in our donations. People understand the crisis. They understand the need. And they also understand how important it is to make sure we have no kid going hungry.
Oh man, Pam, thank you so much for your time today, bringing us these messages, walking us through these talking points. And thank you for doing your job every day. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Pamela and Megan, for those insights and that conversation. Now, please welcome Natalie Scott, who shares a story about how an earworm of a song from 2011 helped her and her husband get through a personal tragedy.
My friend Danielle asked to go out dancing one night, so we headed out to Kelly's Logan House in Wilmington, Delaware. While we were there was this group of people next to us taking all these pictures. So Danielle offered to take a group shot. That was the icebreaker. One of the guys, Nick, and I started dancing. We danced the rest of the night until we were the last three on the dance floor, where he insisted we stay to dance to Journey's Don't Stop Believing. 1 year later, we were still dancing to that same song at our wedding. Years later, on my 27th birthday, I woke up and knew I was ready to have a baby. I was in no hurry, but I knew when it happened, I would be ready. And it did. 2 pink lines. Those 3 words on their own have no significance, but put them together and they can be life-changing. And for us, it was only the beginning. My pregnancy was normal, my labor and delivery not as much, but at the end, we brought home a beautiful baby girl named Eleonora. She came home on Father's Day and we thought, this is it. This is the rest of our lives. Until the most unimaginable thing happened. I was 28 years old, holding my baby girl in my arms, Nick's arms around us. If one were to paint a picture of us in that moment, we were, by all means, the perfect new family. But the backdrop of that scene was an emergency room, and the tone was desperation, despair, and depression only starting to seep in. 1 minute, we were holding a perfectly healthy baby, and the next minute, she was gone. As we held our baby girl's lifeless body for the last time, we wondered why. Why us? Why her? And what were we going to do now? I love to paint another beautiful scene of how we bounced back from our grief quickly. But to be honest, when you lose a child, the pain cuts deep into your soul and is only amplified by the fact that people around us kept having babies and keeping them. 1 minute, we were dreaming about first words and first steps, kissing her goodbye as she went off to kindergarten, beaming with pride as she graduated from high school and college, and walking her down the aisle as she started her own family. And the next moment, our dreams came crashing down like tsunami waves on an ill-prepared lifeboat, our hearts splintering like the boards of that boat. We were crushed under the weight of the magnitude of our loss. For a long time, we only saw blackness, like the depths of the ocean. We felt alone and broken. We clung to each other like a lifeline as we faced a world that did not understand our loss, where people made comments that are not meant to hurt, but cut deeply, like, you'll have another one day, and every day gets easier. I can tell you that every day does not get easier. What I tell people now is every day is different. Some days are great, and you start feeling like yourself again. And other days, the pain returns with such intensity that it's like you've lost your baby all over again. When we came home from the hospital, the house was so quiet without her. The silence was deafening. Have you ever had that happen before, where it was so quiet, it was loud? That's what it was like for us. So we walked the entire neighborhood until it was dark and we were forced to go back home. And when we got home, we tried to ignore the pack and play and the void left by her absence. When we finally could go to sleep, I couldn't even escape our loss there. I dreamed of holding her in my arms, but even there, she was not alive. When I woke up, I was holding my pillow instead of her, and I started crying all over again. The tears felt endless. I kept wondering how I could keep crying. As we moved through the motions of each day, planning for a funeral for a baby that we were supposed to keep forever, picking out her flowers and her final outfit, we felt empty the entire time. While we were planning for the funeral, they offered 2 options for caskets that she could lay in for the service. One looked like a shoebox. For most people, this would be the first and only time they met Eleonora. So I asked if we could use her bassinet instead. So when people met her, she looked like a sleeping baby in her purple polka-dotted sleeper rather than an old pair of shoes ready to be thrown out. Nick and I never stopped talking through every hard decision, every hard day, and every painful moment. It seemed like every time one of us was weak, the other was strong, and we held each other up as we hobbled through our grief together. Eventually, though, we found things that made us smile and even laugh. One day, we were in our home office with our dogs Panda and Tater when the song Moves Like Jagger by Maroon 5 came on the radio. I could still picture it to this day. It was a small room that once housed my wedding dress on display and would one day be my older son's bedroom. I remember hearing that song and feeling a small spark in my soul. We both picked up a dog and started dancing and singing. I've got the moves like Panda. I've got the moves like Tater. I've got the moves like Jagger. The dogs were not thrilled about dancing around, but I think even they could feel the small but significant shift. For the first time in months, Nick and I laughed. We laughed so hard we cried, the laughter filling the broken places in our hearts and pulling us from our reality. For a moment, we could breathe. We heard that song a lot that season, and every time it brought laughter to our home and hearts. It was silly and simple, but when I look back, that's the moment I knew we would be okay. It would take years to find healing and know the deep peace we now know. But our story is proof that laughter will return, even if it begins with something silly, like a song that I'm pretty sure Maroon 5 never meant to be funny. Every time I hear that song, still to this day, I smile and remember that first time, that first light in the darkness. It takes incredible strength to heal from a loss like this. It's a strength that none of us think we have until we're forced to face it. We wish with every part of us that Eleonora was still here in our arms, but we found the meaning in her short life and the messiness of the emotions that followed. One day, years after Eleonora died, I sat at my computer and started to type. I wrote her story, our story. I filled my keyboard, cheeks, and hands with tears, but I kept writing. With every key tap, my burden was lifted and healing found its way into my heart. The words found on the pages of our story, released to the world just after Eleonora's 8th birthday, were the greatest gift of healing to me and to everyone who's read them. My book, The Sun Will Rise, helps the reader know that they're not alone in their loss and offers hope that one day they'll see the light again, just like we did. I released a part of my soul that I held so tightly to my chest and was finally able to take a full breath. We found the meaning of her life, so short in days, but so vast in purpose. She's bringing healing to people all over the world, and I encourage others to share their story as well. Just after Eleonora died, my cousin invited us to a share walk event for families who've lost children. I cried through the entire ceremony that year, but it was so healing. We've continued to participate each year. Remember Danielle from the beginning of the story, the one who wanted to go out dancing? She added our name to her March of Dimes team. We continue to walk and fundraise for this worthy cause. These two events are staples in our family each year to keep Eleonora's memory alive. I mentioned that Nick and I never stopped talking, but what I should mention is that we never stopped talking about Eleonora. We never shy away from mentioning her name, and we're telling people that we have a daughter. She is and forever will be a part of our family. With my doctor's blessing, we decided to have another baby. Though we were terrified, we stepped out on faith and got pregnant again. We welcomed Pierce a year later and Everett 2 years after that. When I held my sons for the first time, I did not know how long I would have with them. We really never know how long we have with someone. I held them tightly physically and in my heart. We learned from our loss that life can change in one breath. So why not take a full breath and live? Now those babies are 9 and 7. They continue to write the pages of our story. They will continue to tell the story of their sister, and because of that, she will stay alive in them forever. Oh, and by the way, the dogs still cringe a little bit every time Moves Like Jagger starts to play. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, for opening your heart to us with your story about Eleonora. And on a lighter note, thanks for getting that Jagger song stuck in our collective heads for the rest of the evening. You sing that song really well, by the way. And finally tonight, we have Andrew Shelfo. His childhood home felt like a magical place, and his story reflects on that time and how one friend made it a special place.
Even though I've been out of school for quite a few years, when summer ends and the schools open, I feel excited. And this year, I'm even more excited because I'm starting my new job. And it's a job at a college. And my office is on the first floor of Seton Hall University's Walsh Library. And I love libraries and I love learning. And on this day, I'm going to learn something about second chances and home because I'm going to see one of my best friends from childhood die on television. I grew up on West End Road in South Orange, New Jersey. Now, technically, I lived on Ridgewood Road, but West End Road, one backyard away, that's where I spend most of my time. That was my home. I hope that everybody here had a wonderful childhood, but I'm here to tell you that no matter what, mine was better. Our neighborhood was teeming with kids. Now, this was back in the not so distant past when our parents would shoo us out of the house and not expect us home until dinner time. Our parents were all around us, but they weren't on top of us, so it felt like we had freedom. Now, for the most part, we channeled our energy into productive things, positive things like sports. We played all kinds of sports: baseball, basketball, wiffle ball, touch football, and countless other games that we made up and the rules have been long forgotten. Every year we would take some spray paint and we would spray paint on the street white lines to make ourselves a 100-yard football field. And then separate down the street, we would make a baseball diamond. About the rowdiest we ever got was when we would go down to Mystic Myron's magic shop to buy some smoke bombs. "Don't set them off in the street," Myron would say as he swept our quarters into the cash register. I was the jock of the neighborhood. I could run faster than everybody else, and I could throw better than all the other kids. My friend Dom was a year younger. He was pigeon-toed. He was comedically and deathly afraid of bees, and he had Coke bottle glasses. His strength in the neighborhood was in bringing everyone together and being the life of the party. Being with Dom was always a chance at a smile. He was kind and he was funny. And whenever I was with him, I would try to take on this worldly air because I wanted to be someone that he looked up to. So this would manifest in a couple of ways. Like one way is that when he was younger, he would have these kind of fits. He would get so frustrated that he would just start throwing punches at bushes and whoever was in his way. I'm sure today it's something he'd be medicated for. But back then, my solution was to tackle him and sit on his chest and say bad words until he laughed. So I'd tackle him, I'd sit on his chest, and I'd say things like crap and boobies and shit. I don't know why, but it worked. I was also the one who told him about the birds and the bees. And he didn't believe me for 1 second, not even after he went home and talked to his mom about it. One day he asked me, "Hey, which do you like better, vanilla lightning or the dominant force?" Now, this was back in the early 1980s when Darryl Dawkins was shattering backboards in the NBA with his thunderous dunks. Now, Dawkins' nickname at the time was Chocolate Thunder. Dom knew this, and he'd been thinking, and he decided that he needed a nickname too. And he came up with two options: Vanilla Lightning and the Dominant Force. Now, Darryl Dawkins claimed to be from the planet Lovetron, where he would spend the off-season practicing interplanetary funkmanship with his girlfriend, Juicy Lucy. He also played in the NBA. Dom lived in a quiet suburb of New York City, would never, ever grow up to dunk a basketball, and was once spotted online at the bank at 10 years old by himself, not to make a deposit or a withdrawal, but to get the interest updated on his passbook. So the idea that he would have this self-aggrandizing and racially provocative nickname like Vanilla Lightning, it was preposterous. So being the good friend and confidant that I was, I suggested that he go with the dominant force. Honestly, I figured he'd forget about it in a week. Well, wouldn't you know it, the name stuck. And my friend Chris, for the rest of his life, was known as the Dom. Even though Dom was the most conservative kid in our neighborhood in many ways, he was also one who was willing to take a lot of risks. And one of the biggest risks he took was during one of our weekly poker games. We would get together every Friday night and we'd play poker, and we'd start off with like nickel and dime ante, and we just have a good time. Well, one night we ended up playing one of those match the pot games where if you lose, you have to match what's in the pot. And somehow we got to a pot that was worth $96. Now, to give you some perspective on that, I was 2 years away from getting my first job, and that job would pay me only $10 a week. I was in 7th grade, and Don was in 6th grade. So $96 in the pot, most of it in the form of IOUs from Dom, and we're all nervous because we don't want to go in and lose. So they deal the cards, we all look at them, go out, we're relieved. Dom immediately proclaims that he's in, and he immediately loses. He had to take a paper route in 6th grade to pay off his gambling debts. Now, you might ask, well, why didn't he just use that bank account of his? Well, he didn't because he knew even back then that you never touch principal. We learned a lot on West End Road. We learned how to gamble. We learned how to drink the beer we stole from our parents and our older siblings. We learned how to endure crushes from girls in the next block. We learned how to survive the annual chestnut wars we had with the kids from Winthrop Terrace. And we learned how to go confidently into the world. And as we got older, we spent a little less time on West End Road. Some of us moved away. Some of us went to college. And after a few years, we just stopped hanging out in what was once our home. And eventually, those spray-painted lines, they faded away. Dom went to Dartmouth, where he majored in government. And after he graduated, he got a job as a bond trader. And then he married a girl that he met on West End Road, and he had 2 kids. And he was working at the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001, when it was attacked by terrorists. And I and the rest of the world saw the towers collapse with him in it. Seeing one of my best friends from high school and life and childhood die on television, it was horrible. At first, we tried to keep up hope because he was officially missing, but everybody was missing. And then we realized, well, something is really wrong because he would have done anything if he'd been able to, if he'd been alive, to reach out to his family. We put up posters in Lower Manhattan. We tried to keep up the hope, but we knew he was gone. And it was a gut punch because, well, it was sad on its own, but then my grief was kind of magnified because there were 3,000 other people who died as well. So my grief felt magnified, and it also felt insignificant at the same time. So what about those second chances? Well, Dom had a second chance because he survived the first bombing at the World Trade Center in 1993. And after that bombing, he stayed and he helped other people get out because that's the kind of guy he was. But the terrorists had a second chance too. And I feel like I didn't really get enough of a second chance because I didn't get to see him and laugh with him. The best second chance would have been if he'd been found okay on 9/11, but he wasn't found at all. And his family didn't get a second chance to be with him. And as I thought about it, it turns out that second chances don't really exist, because they're really just first chances, because we never know when we're taking a chance. Because sometimes you take a chance when you just walk out of your house and you go to work one day. And it kind of sucks to realize that, because second chances only exist in stories. And stories, while they can make you laugh, that laughter can't make the pain go away forever. First time I told this story, this is where the story ended, right here, with me in this mass of pain and confusion. But then recently I found out that there's more to the story. Dom's memorial was held in Our Lady of Sorrows Church in South Orange, New Jersey. Now, this is the church where we all made our first communions, where we made our confirmations. It was where Dom got married. I had never seen it as crowded as it was the day of Dom's memorial. More than 1,500 people showed up. I knew all that, of course. But a couple 9/11s ago, I posted a video of myself telling this story, and I got a lot of nice likes and comments. But then my brother called me up that night and he told me something I didn't know about that day. The day of Dom's memorial, my brother drove through the old neighborhood, and the town had put down a fresh coat of asphalt on West End Road. And on the morning of the memorial, someone had gone and repainted all those old lines. And the message is this: someone from West End Road may have died on 9/11, but the spirit of West End Road lives on. And we have to believe in second chances and third chances, fourth, fifth, infinity chances. Because not to believe in second chances is something that's too terrible to consider. The dominant force lives on. Thank you.
Andrew, thanks so much for sharing this heartfelt story about Dom. The vivid description of him and your neighborhood growing up reminds me of my feral childhood in a suburb of Wilmington, Delaware, and I'm sure others can relate to having grown up like that as well. But thank you so much. Well, that's all for tonight, folks. Please join me in thanking our storytellers, Delma, Kaja, Kim, Natalie, and Andrew, for opening their hearts and helping us to create community. And thanks to everyone from the Storytellers Project to produce this evening of live virtual. And please consider donating at nokidhungry.org/USA Today. Good night, all.
Get an,